we recognize the sponsors that help us. I'd like to recognize Ross and Stafford of CRI. We're here in their facilities. Nice place to meet. Thank you for that. We've got Jim and Paulette with Chapter 2. They're a good sponsor. We've got Carl of EPI Use, which they do a lot of our work for the website and other IT, which helps us quite a bit. We've got some sponsors of our chapter down in Houston, Community Bank of Texas and Boyer Miller. So some good sponsors with them down there. And Kennesaw State University is a sponsor. For those of you that don't know, we mentor a number of the EMBA candidates, and they've also sponsored us. We've got a close relationship. In fact, a lot of the CEO Netweaver members, they make presentations to the EMBA classes during their program. And Capital Grill is another sponsor of ours. So thank you everyone for helping us have the organization that we have and allow us to have the impact that we have. Want to just real quickly go through, we're doing a lot of net weaving this year. We're trying to reactivate the ability for everybody to meet each other. I know a lot of people say this is the first event I've gone out for recently and things like that. We have the speaker series, obviously. We're having a happy hour the third week of the month on Wednesdays, so you're welcome to that. We have a book readers program on the last Wednesday of the month, which you can attend virtually. There's a book picked out each month that we discuss. And then CEO Chat is at the beginning of the month, and it's a chance to discuss whatever is on your mind with regards to your business and how to get advice on that. So we're trying to structure those events so that there's plenty of opportunities for us to meet each other, to get to know each other, because that's been, frankly, a little bit hard in the past couple of years. Another thing we're doing is the troikas. For the members, you've been introduced to 2 other members each month. And the idea is to at least meet once during the month, virtual or in person, and have a chance again to get to know the membership a little bit better and see who it is that you're members with and how you might be able to net weave, which means helping each other with your network. How can we make connections? So those are some of the net weaving things for our membership.
That's right now. Try it now.
And then paying it forward, we've got 2 big programs. One is Inflection Point, and that's where companies that are at literally an inflection point, they have a big problem that they'd like solved, have a chance to meet with a group of us over a period of 3 to 4 months, 3 or 4 times, and get advice from a group of our membership. So that's a great program. A lot of us like being part of that. We are looking for candidates. So we have room to take companies on. So if you know a company that is in revenue, we're not pre-revenue, we're not the type of trying to find money for pre-revenue companies. But if you know a company that's struggling with a specific problem, have them approach us and they can get some free consulting basically. And the other one is mentorship. We mentor right now at Kennesaw and at Georgia State for their EMBA programs. We also mentor at Georgia Tech, but they're on a hiatus this year. They weren't able to activate the program. So we have a chance for our members to work with the EMBA candidates and again, give them help through their program, give them some advice, particularly as they're getting close to graduating. So that's our programs. Please figure out how you can get involved, how you can meet more of the other members, and also help us amplify our impact on the Atlanta community, okay? I'm standing in for Dave Wallens. He's traveling today. He's the president for Atlanta. John Vandy is the president for Houston. And then Eric Anderson is our vice president, and he'll be the president next year for Atlanta. So that's the leadership team. If you haven't had a chance to meet them when they're here, please reach out and try and say hi to them. So we've gone through the the net weaving. We've gone through some announcements. Now I'd like to turn it over to Mike Blake to introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everybody. Before I get started, I want to point out that the book for this month's CEO Book Readers Club is Traction by Gino Wickman. So if you're familiar at all with the entrepreneurial operating system, that's something I've been reading a lot about in the last 3 months or so. That'll be the book this month. Last Wednesday, so if you're into the whole book club thing, we've had some really good meetings, small but very energetic. People have actually read the book, been very stimulating conversations. I would encourage you to be on the lookout and make sure that you register for that. I don't need any notes. Our speaker today
Next
is.
slide if you want to see her bio.
Oh, good. I may not need notes, but somebody else might.
Here, try it. There
Good. So, as most of you may be aware, today is, or this year is what we're calling the year of talent. So all of our speaking programs this year are addressing talent retention, acquisition, development, compensation, motivation, leadership in some way, shape, or form over the course of the year. And today's speaker is somebody I'm so delighted that has agreed to come with us. I've known her for a number of years, but for whatever reason, through coronavirus, our friendship has become much stronger over the last 2 years or so. And I've gained a profound appreciation and respect for the things she accomplished and has accomplished and is accomplishing in this stage of her career. And I asked Lauren to come speak today because in my mind, she's in one of the toughest industries when it comes to employee retention. Chris was talking about 4 million quits. I'll bet you 2 million of them worked in a restaurant, or at least it probably feels like that. So there's nobody better qualified to talk about how do you retain employees in this environment, in these conditions, in a scenario, in an industry that has turnover as sort of a way of life, as a part of the business model, frankly. I just think she's going to provide, I know she's going to provide tremendous insight. So Lauren is a successful restaurateur. She started, funded through private equity, and ultimately sold a chain of 8 restaurants. She is an investor in new restaurant brand concepts. She is an advisor to other restaurant brand concepts as well. She holds a law degree and spent some time in intellectual property law, holds an MBA from Emory University. She was the Woman of the Year in 2015 for raising money for cancer research for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And then most recently, I discovered this last night as I was preparing for this, she was also named to the National Restaurant News Power List just this year. So I'm just so thrilled that Lauren is here to join us. Lauren Fernandez, welcome to CEO Netweavers.
Thank you so much for having me today. We are going to talk a lot about employee retention, but first I want to ask a question of everyone who's on our Zoom today and here in the room. Has anyone here ever worked in a restaurant, going even back to your youth? Oh, like that's almost everybody. That's amazing. It's actually one of the first job of everyone's first job when they start career. Almost everyone has worked in a restaurant at some point in their life. And so you've been exposed to these environments that we're going to talk a lot about today, which have contributed to a lot of the cultural, oops, can I get a,
Oh, sorry, I clicked on.
that's okay, that's okay.
So keep going.
I'm just going to keep, we're just going to move forward a little bit.
Yep, there we go.
It's okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about why the restaurant industry is such an excellent example for how we can do better with employee retention. We're going to talk a little bit about some of our, thanks for the
Sorry, okay.
So we're going to talk about some of the lasting impacts that COVID has had in our industry. And today I'm going to give you 3 practical tips that you can take away and apply to any industry. I tried to scrub it so that our advice that we normally give to restaurateurs would be accessible and available to you in any industry, in any company. So let's talk about why the restaurant industry is so vitally important. In 2027, we're expected to add a whopping 1.6 million jobs by then to our industry. And this was pre-pandemic, so we have some making up to do too. We're comparing that to twice of the natural growth of the population. So the demand for jobs in our industry is not going away anytime soon. Pre-COVID, we're recording a very low unemployment rate with respect to labor and employment for restaurants and hospitality, meaning hotels. And look, over 4 million employees that were let go or furloughed as part of that COVID environment were unsure if they plan to return. So again, massive deficit of employees to make up for, in addition to huge growth in the industry. Punchline here, restaurants are going to continue to struggle. This is not going away anytime soon. This is not something that's going to fix itself in a year or 2 or 3. So when I get on my soapbox about what really makes brands exceptional in the restaurant industry, the answer is always people. We have to fix this issue. So buckle up, because it's going to be a wild ride, but if it's affecting your industry too, you are not alone. You can call me and we'll cry into our Wheaties together, because this is basically what we tell everyone it's going to look like. What is that dip in the middle of the summer? Anyone want to take a guess? Back to school. So one of the largest segments of employers and employees in the restaurant industry is 16 to 24. So that's people coming off of a normal school schedule and looking for a summer job. But this is more or less what last year looked like, and we anticipate this year to look like as well. Temporary relief during the summer, but back to feeling the pain in the fall. So how did we get here? Let's talk about how we might have contributed to this a little bit as an industry. So pre-COVID, lots of jobs in the food service industry, huge segment of the economy. 10% of all jobs on payroll were connected to the restaurant industry. That's a lot. 4% of the US GDP. It's a massive contributor to the local economies, and it's the second largest employer in the US as a private employer. Yet you might be surprised to find out that prior to the pandemic, only 13% of limited service restaurants reported being fully staffed. Think about that for a minute. That means the vast majority of restaurants, even with limited service, which if you're familiar with a limited service model, that's where you might take a number and someone would bring your food to the table. That's a ridiculous amount of understaffed happening even prior to the pandemic. Full service brands, where you have a waiter assigned to your table, only 38% of them reported being fully staffed in 2019. Anyone seeing the writing on the wall here? Pandemic happens, millions of people, 4 million people furloughed, laid off, or outright fired. Where did they go? They went to the burgeoning manufacturing and delivering segments in the economy. So if you look, this chart is representing where all of those jobs went. Warehousing and storage, non-store retailers, deliveries, couriers, and messengers. All of those jobs provide the flexibility and the same or similar base rate of pay, benefits or lack thereof, and we're a one-to-one substitute for our industry. And guess what? Those folks are not coming back. Of the folks that were furloughed, 2 out of 3 laid off said they were probably not coming back. And that statistic has indeed rang true across many segments of our industry are suffering the same consequences. Now let's talk about the lasting impacts of this, not only for our industry, but for the people who are working in it. Now, one of the things that happens a lot in restaurants, it's a dirty little secret, is that many restaurants lose the equivalent of their entire profit margin for a year on turnover. In some segments of the industry, it's over 170% a year, meaning the entire staff of the restaurant turns over 1.7 times. That's incredible. And think about the human cost of capital there. It's not just about the fact that you have to train new employees, which we estimate to be about 10% of a salaried employee in expense to replace a lost salaried employee, and up to $2,500 for an hourly wage worker. They are not indeed disposable, and many restaurant owners do not understand that this contributes to significant losses in their business. And there's severe psychological harm of feeling like you are disposable and nameless and faceless and replaceable in an industry that accepts such churn, right? Now, let's accept for a minute, back to our earlier roller coaster graphic, that some of that churn is going to be seasonal traffic. That's accepted, but I would submit to you that it's not over 100% churn. That just doesn't make sense. Now, the average tenure for an hourly restaurant employee is 2 months in a restaurant, 2 months. The average tenure for a manager, 4 months. And across the entire industry, that's over 100% turnover. This was true before the pandemic, by the way. So as a result of the pandemic, again, we have over 4 million people less in our talent pool to work with. And the largest and most significant demographic, right? There are nearly 2 million less 16 to 34-year-olds who want to join the restaurant industry, leaving us in even a more severe deficit. And according to the US Bureau of Labor and Statistics, there are less women in the workforce. This has been an ongoing issue that hopefully will start to alleviate itself now that schools are reopening. But women for the last 2 years have been very slow to return to the workforce, largely because of childcare concerns and disparity in pay issues. If you have 2 parents, a husband and a wife, and children to take care of at home, the person who's providing the larger salary will often return to work, while the lesser salary will stay at home, and has largely contributed to the resulting effect of women not returning to the workforce in general. 1 out of every 3 restaurant workers has a child at home under the age of 18, which by definition makes them a working parent regardless of gender. So in this industry, it is incredibly important that we make space and room for and flexibility for working parents. Now, let's talk about what people are doing to help fix this issue in our industry. 3 out of 4 operators surveyed last year said that they were primarily focused on recruiting talent, but they were only spending 24% of their time retaining talent. Even worse, only 14% were focused on employee well-being and morale on their teams. Now, back to our extreme growth, right? We talked about all the jobs that are coming into our industry. I think it's probably about time we talked about retention and not just recruitment, right? So I'm sorry, we have a few redundant slides in here. All right, so let's talk about what we can do and take away some practical tips for how we can help in not just in the restaurant industry understand this, but in your industries as well. So the first strategy is understanding mission and purpose. Companies that have a clearly defined mission and purpose and that are able to articulate that not only to their customers, but also to their employees are far more likely to really have a loyalty that's engendered and really keep those employees in the 4 walls of the business. Let's talk about how to do that. The first thing is clearly and concisely defining your mission and purpose. Of the companies that you admire, think about it for a minute. What are some of the ones that everyone wants to work for? If you have a teenage son or daughter, where do you want them to go to learn how to be a good employee? And when you point at some of those companies, often people say like Home Depot or Chick-fil-A, let's use some local Atlanta examples since we're in Atlanta today. Those companies, regardless of whether or not you are aligned with their purpose and mission, they're very clear on what it is. And the thing is, it pushes through every aspect of the business. It's in the way they train their employees. It's in the way that they treat their customers at the end of the day. But every step of that purpose and mission is something that's bought into and believed in by the employees, right? And then an important part is they are actionable. Employees know how to live out that mission and purpose that's part of the brand. They feel it's their responsibility to show it, live it, and do it every day at work, right? And that's something that's expected of them, not only in their own good judgment, but in the way that they execute the brand standards and customer service, where ultimately we measure these types of benefits. One of the things that's very important is measuring this, right? The number one place in restaurants that this kind of alignment to mission and purpose with employees shows up is in, well, it's 2 places. First, employee surveys, right? Checking in, hearing from them and making sure that there's alignment there. The second place is in customer service scores, because happy employees who are aligned to your mission and purpose will make for happier customers in the end of the day, right? There's just no friction there. If they're buying into what you are selling as a mission and purpose, they will go out and do it. Now, it has to be part of the brand from top to bottom. And I'd like to use an example of how we do this with some of our clients. Now, some of our clients have very clear purpose and mission, but do you know where we start when we're building around an independent restaurant operator who has owned and operated their business for years? We start with their personal mission and purpose, right? Because for companies that don't have a clearly defined purpose and are operated by a sole operator, that's usually a good indicator of why they're doing this in the first place. So we start with the easier question. What's your purpose and mission? Because when you're building a restaurant company, we have to take that own personal mission into consideration, not just the brand's stated purpose and mission. But we take that a step farther. We go all the way down into every level of the business. So that means if one of the purpose and mission is to add joy and spark to someone's breakfast every morning, let's just take that as an example. And they do it in a kind of funny, irreverent way. Guess what? The training materials are not going to be dry as toast. They're not going to be on a boring recipe card. That same tone, purpose, and mission has to flow through all of the training materials, whether it's a recipe card, right, with a talking biscuit that tells you how to make a better biscuit, or it's a training video where you use a little bit more tongue in cheek and it's a little bit more off the cuff, but still accomplishing the mission in the training video. Because that alignment to the brand's purpose and mission and the tone, the voice, and the art that we use to communicate the brand matters. It's an entire package. So we make sure that that entire raison d'etre of a brand is infused to everything we do. And that is something that makes an all-encompassing environment for every layer of an employee and for a customer to really feel the experience of that purpose and mission. I'm going to pause for a second. Does anyone have any questions about this part of the presentation?
So are you helping folks create the talking biscuit? Is that what you're saying?
Our company not only does the training materials, that we really build out a solid foundation for restaurants to grow. So in every aspect of operations, that whether we're documenting something or creating those best practices within the restaurant, that check against the purpose and mission is an excellent filter to make sure that we have alignment. Not every client has the same recipe book, not even as a template in our company. We design them custom for each client. Yeah. Yes, Cordelia.
How do you help a company find that purpose when they really don't know beyond, well, we're here to make money, we're here to not be miserable, which I would say are the two biggest.
Right. So we ask why. And there's a great book series called QBQ, the question behind the question. And I love it because it's like peeling back layers of the onion until you really get to your why. So let's use an example for that. We invest in restaurants and we help them grow. We're a major part of their growth and development, but we don't even put a single dime in until we're very clear on what their why is. And when someone comes to me and says, I want to have 1,000 restaurants, my first question is why? That sounds really tough. Really? You want to, okay, let's talk about that. Why do you want that? And they go, well, I want to make $20 million. And I go, oh, okay, that's 20 million. How'd you get to that from 1,000? And they give me an explanation. I go, okay, why 20 million? And they just look at me and they go, well, because 20 million sounded good. And I said, well, is that going to fund your retirement? Like, what are your goals with the game here? And they sit back and they look at it and they go, well, I figured it would be enough. And I was like, okay, so what's the why behind that? Do you want to give this thing up in 5 years when we sell it and sit on a beach somewhere? What's your end game? What's your vision for the end? Often when people trip up over their entire purpose and mission, you're asking them to think and put words to something that exists in a part of your brain that you don't even have verbal articulation for. So if you can help them visualize the end game, sometimes you can work back to the why. So that's one of my favorite things to do for people who are especially really stuck. We do a visualization exercise of what does this look like in 5 years? Are you in the restaurant? Are you opening a new location? Are you on vacation? Are you around the world and disconnected from your cell phone on a jet? Like what's the visual? And it's interesting, you get a range of answers, But I think that often starts a more thoughtful discussion, because if you know the end game, you can pretty much reverse engineer the why, and then it starts a more fruitful discussion about their purpose. I had one client come in, and when we actually got down to the why, it was about creating a cultural bridge so that their heritage and culture were better understood by people through food. And that is so powerful. I mean, that gives me goosebumps even now. That's such an experience to create. So you know what we do when we design restaurants for them? Every moment, we jokingly call it, it's like a cross between their mother's kitchen times Nat Geo times a fun time, right? Like, we want them to enjoy the food, but we want to teach them while they're doing it. We want to expose them to their country of origin and their heritage. And that becomes something that we, again, infuse that purpose and mission, not just into training, but even into just the restaurant experience and design. So sometimes there's a few hacks for how we can consult to really get to that answer. Peel back the layers. Yeah, JC.
What's the average size of your clients? Do you got more people go from 1 to 5 to 10 or 10 to 20? Do you work with country clubs as well?
Oh, it's a great question. So we do consult with all types of different restaurants, including country clubs, bars, pop-ups, food trucks, you name it. I've done it all. We primarily, for the sake of our fund that we raise, so we have a $20 million fund that we use to allocate to roughly 5 to 7 clients who fit our criteria. That criteria is independently owned and operated, 0 to 10 units. It's okay if they've already turned on franchising, and they have to be in the casual segment. So anywhere from maybe a drive-through to a white tablecloth with limited service, kind of somewhere in between there. That's a great question. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yes.
On the mission and purpose,
Mhm.
when you have an average tenure of 2 months for the hourly workers,
Mhm.
how do you get traction on this? You know, there's the chicken and the egg, people are turning
Yeah.
over, and how do you keep them long enough to even talk about
Right.
brand and purpose?
So that's a great question. And in case you didn't hear it, it was, if the average churn is 2 months on an hourly employee, how do you even get them informed on your mission and purpose? Wonderful question. Thanks for the softball. Let me answer that for you. So we take a very serious and hard look at our recruitment, and recruitment is only the first touch. So we consider every communication you have to with that prospective employee, and everything through the way the job ad is placed, to what that first communication feels like, to how many times they get texted on their phone to solicit their feedback, right? We have programs in place to make sure their first day should feel like a hug. My chief people and culture officer shares this with everyone, because if you've worked in restaurants, you've had this happen to you. You get hired, you show up for your first day, you knock on the back door of the kitchen, someone opens the door after 5 minutes, you know, they're elbows deep in something, they shove the door open like this and they go, "Who are you? Why are you here?" And you're like, I was hired. And they're like, "For what?" And that's literally how the first day looks. I'm serious. But when restaurants are in the weeds, that's what it feels like. It's like they're just hiring anyone who will walk through the door, and they're like, "What can you do? Have you held a knife before? Do you know how to do dishes? What can you do? Tell me now." And then like they just throw them into it. The first day is so critical. Every aspect of your purpose and mission needs to feel like a good old big Southern hug when you walk in the door. And I don't care what version of that you articulate, but it has to line up with what your company is all about. So that first day has got to feel like this when they come in the door. At the end of the first day, they have to have a check-in. They have a buddy through the whole first month, someone they can check in with at work. And this is how you make a difference. You take the time in a frantic, harried, understaffed industry. You have to figure out a way to carve out the time for these new employees, because if you don't, they will jump for another buck across the street. And this is not a wage war. Like, I just want to be very clear. This is not a wage and benefits war. If you try to win back employees with money, you will lose. You have to pay what market is for labor. That is economics, folks. That's just the way it works. So if a dishwasher now costs $14 an hour, you either hire a dishwasher for $14 an hour, get a machine, or do it yourself. I mean, those are your 3 options, right? So I mean, the reality is it's so much more than just the wage. And there's a lot in the media about, you know, wage hikes and inflation and all this kind of stuff. And I would submit to you that this is it's a much deeper systemic issue with how we respect and treat people in restaurants, right? Anyone working in a restaurant is providing to you arguably one of 4 primal needs that you need in your life: clothing, shelter, warmth, maybe an air conditioning in a hot Georgia or Texas summer, right? And food. So you are not in this industry because you love long hours and being on your feet all day. You are in this industry because you love serving other people through food. And to have any kind of disrespect for folks who are willing to show up for an hourly wage or a salary to do that is unacceptable to me. Every single person in a restaurant is important, regardless of whether they're front of house or back of house or a manager or not, right? And we need to do better as an industry. We have tolerated a lot of toxic cultures for a long time, and this is the antidote. If you are clear on what your company's purpose and mission is, and you start infusing it in every single thing that you do, you won't have, short tenure and 170% turnover, right? When we see restaurants that have that kind of churn, it does not matter how efficiently they're run. You know what the problem almost always is? Toxic leadership. They will put on, you're the owner, you walk in the door and everyone's like, hey, how's it going? You pull someone aside, you're like, how's it going? They're like, oh my God, the manager did X, Y, and Z. And you start kind of peeling back the layers. Churn is about treating people poorly. And this is how you fix it.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Could you get into more what toxic leadership really looks like?
We talk about toxic leadership in restaurants. So let's talk about it. I mean, I think this is part of, so that it's a very male dominated industry. And while not every aspect of our industry looks like this, I can give you some really great examples. They're known for being what would be commonly called, and I'm going to use my lawyer term, as a hostile work environment, right? So there's a lot of high pressure, close proximity, long hours. And so there's often a lot of inappropriate behavior. That's one big thing. I think most people who've worked in restaurants have some kind of experience with that. The other thing is this idea of the glamorized screaming chef, right? So there's a lot of toxic leadership around, and I don't want to just put it on the doorstep of chefs. I think this is something that exists in our industry across many different types of roles, where it's acceptable to scream at somebody. Now, I don't know about you, but this is not a rule from my corporate life. There is no situation, unless someone is dying, hurt, or about to be one of those two things, where you need to raise your voice. If you need to raise your voice and that's where you're going, you probably need to take 5 and walk away, right? And that's how we teach our children. That's what I expect of my employees. And yet yelling is normal in restaurant environments, which I just can't wrap my head around. So when we bought our restaurants, that was a rule. Like you did not yell unless someone was about to be hurt. And we ran in a concept that was not necessarily high pressured. We don't have 2 Michelin stars. It wasn't even as high pressured as a fine dining environment can be, but there's still a lot of pressure. I mean, tell me you don't feel pressure when there are 50 tickets lined up. That's 50 people waiting for their food between 3 delivery services, your proprietary delivery service, the catering, and the people who are sitting in your restaurant. So that's a pressure cooker. And I think sometimes with an absence of good leadership, you actually see a lot of toxic behavior, not just at the top, but at the bottom too, like across all of the employees. So I can speak to what it looks like from our industry. And look, I want to say this. I think these behaviors are learned. I think, again, back to my earlier point, I'm pragmatic, but I also am very optimistic and I love people. So I'm going to just share with you that I genuinely believe no one comes into an environment wanting to exhibit toxic behavior. You don't come into restaurants and hospitality, wanting to be a toxic employee. I don't think that that's the case. I think that when you set up these kinds of environments and perpetuate this and allow it to exist, you're showing them that that's accepted behavior. That's the boundary. And most people will satisfice, they will stoop to or join that lowest common denominator because it's easier than having to be the one holding up the beacon. That's a great question.
With toxic leadership, how often do you have to cut bait move on versus coach down?
That's a great, the question was, how often do you have to, on toxic leadership in particular, how often do you have to cut bait or can you coach around it? In our industry, I have had very little success in coaching around behavior. So, and here's why. I think for people who exhibit that kind of behavior, especially if they've been doing it for 20 years, it's very hard to unring that bell. And so I would submit to you that perhaps it depends on where someone is in their kind of career cycle. Folks that have been doing this, who we would call old school, like just, it's very hard to coach them to these kinds of really important and I think game-changing things like purpose and mission for a restaurant company. And I don't want to make it an ageist thing. I just think sometimes people are more open to coaching than others. Now, I think at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to. Are they open to receiving that coaching? I've had some people who we've coached and we think they're doing better, but they just learn how to put the veneer on, and then behind the scenes, they're doing all the same stuff again. Right? It's unfortunate, but it's true. But here's the thing. Let's go back to the point. 2/3 of all the employees in restaurants are 16 to 34. Let's think about that as an opportunity then to raise up the next generation of restaurant leadership so they know, understand, and value the things that we're talking about. They know how to not create a toxic environment, and they know how to put those fires out when they happen. That's a great question. Okay, gonna move on.
And yet
Yes.
you're being hired to change an environment. So someone wants you to evaluate it, invest in it, help it grow and change. So is that typically the owner?
Yeah, so yeah, we work
Sometimes they're
direct.
part of the problem, but then the people below them are
Right, so we're
feeling pressure.
working with owner operators directly. They are the ones that retain us to work with them as a partner and grow their companies, right? They are bringing on us as equity partners, not only to help develop their business and grow it, but to help coach them through these issues, right? So all of our owner operators go through leadership training, which is a completely separate course. As we start vesting equity and investing capital, they go into leadership training.
Right.
So that's a whole other level beyond. So yes, we work to define the company's purpose and mission. It comes out in the brand story. It comes out in the design and architecture. It comes out in the training materials. It's the way we treat our employees on day 1 and day 90, right? But it's also about raising up the next gen of restaurant leadership so they are ready and prepared for environments that will challenge this, right? Ready for situations that will put to the fire whether or not their purpose and mission is going to be challenged. It's a great question.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
You know, I'm a social psychologist by orientation and training, and I'm hearing some really textbook social psychological principles.
Yes, I was
really-
raised by a therapist. A child psychologist nonetheless, but yes, I understand.
To me, that's a little bit, this is worth another conversation.
Yeah.
But to me, it's not just simply therapeutic.
Mhm.
It's not clinical.
Mhm.
There's actually some social, psychological stuff here that you're talking about, which is textbook.
Yeah.
It's really
Oh, I didn't invent these things for sure. I mean, there's a lot of social psychology behind the things that we're talking about. And I think part of why I'm on my soapbox about this now is I don't like complaining about anything unless I have a solution, and we have solutions for this. My company provides solutions for this. We are on our soapbox saying it's not good enough to just pump money into a restaurant brand. You have to shepherd them through this growth cycle where they become leaders. They're no longer owner operators in position in the business. They're working on the business and leading it from a 30,000-foot view. And to do that, most all restaurateurs need coaching, they need shaping, and they need leadership training. I know I did. I mean, come on, we all had mentors. We all had people who helped us. Those are things that you don't necessarily learn in business school. You learn them on the job. And as an industry, we are falling down. We have a moral obligation because we are a lot of people's first jobs. 2/3 are 16 to 34. Think about the enormous impact you could have on people's lives if you send them out the door of your restaurant a better leader, a better person for understanding what appropriate context is for a work environment and knowing what their own personal mission is, right? It's an enormous chance to, I think, reshape our industry at this time where it's been quite broken down through a pandemic and do better. So let's talk about alignment, because this is something that I believe very dearly in, not only for my companies when I'm growing them, for my team when we're creating roles for people, but it's very important that you have employees that are aligned to your purpose and mission. And so let's talk a little bit about how that plays out as not just a recruiting tool, but a retention tool. So one of the things we like to talk about is an employee value proposition. An employee value proposition basically answers this question: why would I want to come work for you? Can you guys answer that about the company that you work for right now? Why would I want to come work for you? Don't make it about money. Don't make it about benefits, and answer the question. It's tough. It's tough. But that's what an employee value proposition is. That employee value proposition is the articulation of your mission and purpose to a prospective employee when you are trying to recruit them. It is also the measuring stick by which you retain employees throughout the tenure of their employment. Because if you are not fulfilling that promise of why would I come and work for you, guess what? You lack alignment, you lack authenticity, and nobody likes working for a liar. So they'll jump, and they'll jump for another $1 across the street. They'll jump for another 10K at your competitor, right? Now you're saddled with the cost of replacing that employee and a lost opportunity to create alignment. So yes, I'm sorry.
When you talk about an employee value proposition, it's how do you go from being transactional to being more relationship oriented? I know a lot of times people get hyped, it's a transaction.
Yeah.
I pay you, you give me so many hours.
Right. Yeah. So it's about viewing the employee on a more human level and creating systems and processes where you are checking into them regularly. You understand them. It's much more than just a quarterly review, folks. This is not. And listen, if you haven't gotten this memo yet, the 2 generations that are coming up that comprise this, right? Millennials and everyone south of them, Gen Z and all the different names they have for them. This is what they care about. They care that you care. They want to work for companies that have purpose. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can look at any of the research on this issue. They are not as motivated by money and security as the boomer generation was. We have radically shifted the pendulum in the other direction. They care about knowing where their food comes from. They care about social purpose and causes. They care that they get a paid day off to go volunteer at a charity once a month. Think about how different that is from the corporate environments that we all grew up in. When I was at a company where we had a mandatory day of volunteerism every year, I was very proud of that. We got a new CEO. You know what he said to me? I can't believe we wasted an entire day of the company's money to have everyone go paid volunteer. They should do that on their own time. And I thought, I'm not going to be here much longer because that's a misalignment with my mission and purpose. I'm here in service to others. I'm putting in 80 hours a week because I love my job and I'm doing this to serve our customers, or serve our clients. And you just sent me a giant red flag that we are not about service to people. Wow. Right? I was gone in 3 months. So I share that example with you. It wasn't the only reason, but I'm just sharing that example with you because that alignment, when you make that promise to someone and they come in and they are employed on the alignment around that purpose and mission, when you step outside the bounds on that, it's a huge red flag, right? Because they no longer have that engendered, endearing feeling of loyalty and alignment, right? And as I get older, I know I have very low tolerance for things that are not aligned to my purpose and mission, right? So my time is valuable. It is the most valuable resource I have. It's limited, it is finite. But for folks who are younger, who maybe don't see it that way, they just see you as being a hypocrite. And I would submit to you that probably is worse to them. They're not necessarily articulating it as, oh, this isn't aligned with my purpose and mission. They're just like, they're full of it. I'm out of here. That's baloney, right? How many times have you seen a manager, a leader say, do as I say, not as I do? Right? That's the kind of stuff that perpetuates a toxic work environment. You know what endears restaurant employees? I'll tell you, like when I'm an owner and I would walk in and if they were swamped on the line, I'd get on the line and help them, right? That is servant-based leadership. And that's not something you just do one day a week or one time. It's how you show up for people every single time. It's in the meetings that are scheduled where you talk about issues. It's about the transparency and authenticity you have, but it's about your actions too, right? So let's also talk about personal alignment. And this is a big one. And so when we're working with our restaurant owners, a lot of them have worn all the hats, right? And this is me, right? Last year, I was in a startup. We hadn't hired many people. I was wearing all the hats, but I know myself and I know what I'm good at and what I'm not. And so some of the first hires that I made were a chief people officer and a chief operating officer, because I knew the highest and best use of my time for this company was fundraising, recruiting the right prospects to put into our fund, and talking to people like you guys today about what we do and how we can fix our industry. It's not necessarily, although I love it, being in a restaurant and working on operations, but I've got someone really awesome to do that now. Now, where does that come from? It comes from a deep level of self-awareness and the humility to understand what I'm good at and what I'm not. So every single one of our owners goes through what we call a DISC assessment and a workplace motivators test. And we discuss those results with them. Part of their growth strategy is developing a role for them that is specifically designed to meet their personal purpose and mission, but also aligned to their work strengths. And it makes all the difference. We then build out the rest of the team around them. So think about that for a minute. I get a lot less friction for all the things I want to do to grow these brands when they know their role is secure. They trust that we're going to build out a team for them that's going to help them achieve these things. And we're not creating additional friction and stress for them with them trying to do things that they're not necessarily good at. And each one is different. Some of them have better people skills. Some of them are better at accounting. Some of them are great at sales. But we look at those things and we're honest and open about them. And we create a culture of transparency, even with our own team and their team, so that we can have these kinds of very real discussions. Because personal alignment is important. You have to put the right people in the right places, right?
So how do you do that assessment?
So a DISC assessment?
Yeah.
So it's an online test that you take, which kind of, it's like a lot of these tests, right? It shows your natural work inclination and your work inclination in your current environment. It's really less of a personality test and more of a alignment test for what your kind of strengths and weaknesses are.
DIS.
DISC. Yeah, I can send you the information afterwards. We really like it a lot. We could talk about that for a whole presentation. But you know, one of the things we also do is in a culture of transparency where we're asking people to take this look in the mirror is we share our own discs. And it's kind of funny when we see clients who have like the same disc that I do. I'm like, oh, that's interesting, right? We have certain profiles we see a lot of. There's like a chef disc where we can see like they test out a certain way every single time, but we don't ever treat it as a foregone conclusion. We like to see, and I think the more important point here is you create a process and a system where that is part of our plan. Like everyone does it. It's okay. You can do it too. We create a culture of openness and discussion around this. So if someone says to us, yeah, like I know my disc really says I'm good at detail, but I really don't want to do the numbers anymore. We take that into consideration. It's important to have that kind of alignment, right? We do a mad dash of 5-year rapid fire growth and development. I have to make sure the anchors on this team are there, right? That the people on our team who are behind the brand are aligned to their future role and the way that the team is going to be built out around them. Now, in all of those roles, you have an opportunity, again, even down to the role definition, to infuse mission and purpose, right? That is where you get engagement with the employee. We do not write standard issue job descriptions. We write them with our employees. And we ask them the question, how will you be living out our purpose and mission? For some people, it's, I want to work on the charitable arm of the business. For other people, it's, I really want to work with our franchisees. I want to change this about our industry. So even on the projects that are a little bit out of field, we make sure that there are ways in their job description and their projects that they're working on that they have a chance to contribute to the company's purpose and mission. And you have to, I think this is important, empower employees to live it every day, right? One of the biggest mistakes I see often is leadership where everything has to be run through the manager. Tight ship runs really well, but everyone's an automaton, right? They're a robot. They go, let me talk to my manager, right? Instead of handling the problem, right? And I use that as a really common example because it's easy to understand why employee empowerment is important. You have to have this moment where you allow the employees to help define their role. You're clear about what the company's needs are, but you give them the flexibility to have some self-fulfillment in actualizing the purpose and mission of the company. This is, of course, operating on the assumption that they're there because they're somewhat aligned with your purpose and mission, because at this point, we're talking about the actual job description and they're there on site. Any questions about this part before I move on? How much time on that? Do you have time?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
We have like 5 more minutes.
Okay. All right, let me move on to this next one. Let's talk about flexibility, because this is another huge issue in our industry. And let's talk about retaining talent through flexible, like being flexible. Retention is the new recruitment strategy, right? Hanging on to the folks that you have is arguably the most important thing you can do outside of recruiting. Although when I showed you those slides earlier, right, everybody was focused, 51% were focused on just recruiting, right? And only 20-something% were focused on retention. And you have to put as much or more energy into retention and building solid and loyal teams now than you ever have before. Because I think people's expectations of the workplace have changed. Their expectations of what flexibility looks like have changed, especially when it comes to work from home. And I think that that's a really key point. Also, I think you have to have a solid employee development strategy. That is a defined or somewhat flexible approach to how an employee is going to better themselves personally and professionally while they're on your watch, right? What kind of opportunities are you going to give them? Do they get to go to conferences? Do they get to take a leadership class? Do they get to have on-the-job training to be promoted to a manager? Is not just enough anymore. I think that people always expected that to be the thing, like, oh, you can be a manager. Well, great, but what else are you doing? And again, back to what this 16 to 34 demographic, which is 2/3 of our industry, needs this. These are the kinds of things for personal and professional development that they are looking for. So make sure that you provide those kinds of opportunities. And look, it may not be something that directly benefits your business, but that has to be okay too. I have one company that we work with who just provides a stipend. They call it an educational stipend. It's a certain amount of dollars a month and they can spend it on anything that's remotely educational. You want to build a remote control car and take a class for that? Knock yourself out. The whole point is they encourage lifelong learning as part of their mission. And that is one of their benefits that they provide their employees. And let's talk about that. Flexible menu of benefits, right? It is no longer okay, especially for these younger generations, to just provide a 401k and matching and healthcare. And I hear a lot in the news about the restaurant industry not providing healthcare. And I tell this story often, but we went and provided healthcare to our 500 employees without asking them if they want it. You know how many people signed up for it? 2. 2. And we went back to them and I fell on my sword and we asked them in an open survey what they wanted. And the number one thing they said, paid time off. They just wanted more paid time off. I can do that. No problem. We can do that as an incentive. We can do that as all kinds of things. So take the moment to solicit feedback from your employees. It's another opportunity for you to create alignment if you are giving them a flexible menu of benefits that runs everything from a childcare stipend to a gas stipend to an educational tuition credit, all the way up to PTO, plus the normal benefits that we're all used to. It's time to start thinking about benefits as really being a menu rather than you use the healthcare or you don't get it, sorry. Right? I think we need to do better than that, not just in our industry, but others. And again, the regular check-in. There's some fantastic software out there, whether it's a texting software or AI-driven texting software that will check in with your employees for you and solicit feedback anonymously and also directly from employees. And so for the busy restaurateur who has, hundreds of hourly employees, using technology to help create those touch points where you get a flag if an employee has an issue is really awesome, right? It's a smart way to deploy the technology to show you where there's fires that you need to put out, but pay attention. I think more than just doing quarterly meetings or reviews, having those check-in moments with your employees where maybe you go to lunch. And one of the best CEOs I ever worked for had a rotating schedule of people he took to lunch once a week. And I worked for another lawyer who was fantastic at this. He'd be like, let's go to breakfast tomorrow morning. And you're sitting there going, oh my God, I have so much to do. Sure, I'll go to breakfast. But those moments were mentoring moments. They were a chance to create alignment. And I'm so loyal to those folks still to this day because they took the time to nurture me in my career. Any questions on this part? Yeah. Go ahead, let me get Mark.
I have a question for you. It seems to me, as I eat at various restaurants around town, that there are certain restaurants that do a much better job at employee retention.
Mhm.
And I suspect that it is because they're following your tips, or they have come
Or they
to the
get it, yeah.
conclusion that that's the best way to run a restaurant.
Yeah.
That being said, it also appears as if the restaurant industry as a whole doesn't do as good a job at employee retention as other industries. Is it the nature of the beast? You know, as I go to other highly civilized countries, especially in Europe, they seem to do a better job at employee retention.
Yeah. The short answer to that, the question was, are there some restaurants that are just better at it? Why is it better kind of in Europe? So the short answer is there are a lot of dynamics at play in United States restaurants that create some of these kind of toxic cultures and high turnover. One of them is obviously what we've already talked about with respect to kind of the appreciation and the treatment of employees as disposable and generating these sort of toxic leadership traits. The other issues, let's just face them, like in the US, we have tip. Tipping as a segment and the way that waiters and wait staff and front of house staff are compensated is a massive problem in our industry. Danny Meyer of Union Square Hospitality Group has done a lot to get on his soapbox and approach this as a solution of how do we close the pay gap between back of house and front of house, which is a huge issue too. So the people who are making your food are taking home significantly less wage than the folks at the front who are making tips. And there is room to do better in this industry for sure around that issue. You know, let's not ignore the fact too that some of these lower paying jobs, they're hard. You're on your feet all day. You haven't lived until you've been 8 hours at a dish tub, because I've done it. It's brutal, right? I mean, I'm serious. Like it's really hard work. Your back will never be the same again. And so there's some of that too. And I don't want to take away from the other issues, but it is just really a hard grind. We see a lot of burnout. So a lot of people who are super great and gifted. We see a lot of working parents just tap out because the flexibility is not there in scheduling, right? Talk about being flexible as a retention strategy. Like they're not being flexible and allowing shift swaps amongst other employees or sharing a salaried role, right? Between two employees. So a working parent could come and work, 7 a.m. to 3 and then tag out to a different salaried person who covers the other half of the job at night. So there's a lot of great things we can do to fix this industry. I think the US is, I'm going to just say it, I think a little behind in some of those issues, including the way that compensation is derived. Cordelia, did you have a question? Okay. Any other questions on that? Yes, Mike.
Can I ask one?
Yes.
Something I think we're facing in my industry, accounting, and Ross may or may not agree, but something we're seeing is there's an assumption that people want to quote get ahead, right? There's an assumption at least from my generation, Gen X and older, that people work so that they can get ahead, they can advance. But one of the things that we're seeing in our industry is that interest in becoming a partner in an accounting firm is low. You're getting lower people, you're getting smaller amounts of people who want to take and pass the CPA exam.
Right.
And people are now, the relationship with the job is just different. Is that something that's you're seeing across other industries? Is that something that's in the restaurant industry as well? That people aren't necessarily going in to work their way up, but rather the job is simply an enabling platform to some broader life purpose as opposed to serving its own master? Yeah,
I think one of the largest issues we face as an industry is recruiting to the industry as a whole, because they are industry jobs in restaurants are perceived as being temporary or a side hustle, or I'm a starving actor, so I wait tables, right? Like there's all these stereotypes about, oh, it's my summer job, right? And those aren't necessarily wrong. It's just how some people treat the industry. And one of the things we're trying to change is talking to teenagers, talking to people who are former felons, like talking to people about having and developing skills in our industry that can equal a career, and making the idea of a career in restaurants more attractive. And I'll own it. Like, I'm an attorney. I have a JD and an MBA. And when I went and bought restaurants, I told nobody. Like, nobody knew. Like, I just was like, oh, I formed a restaurant development group over here. And, you know, there were many days where I was behind the counter at the point of sale taking orders. I thought, you know, some judge I know is going to walk in here. Some lawyer that I know from law school is going to walk in here. And it never happened. But I'm going to own it. I'm going to be honest. Like, there's a little bit of a stigma around working in a restaurant. Like, you can't get a better job, when indeed there's some of the best paying jobs when they're done right? When the owners are flexible, when you have control over your schedule. It's a great job if you love people and food. I love what I do. It's why I'm still doing it, right? I mean, it's not every day that you hang up your, $250,000 Emory Law School degree, roll it up in a tube and get a hairnet and clogs and go to work and you're happier. I mean, I look at it a little bit differently, but I want other people to see it as an opportunity to have a really, really amazing career. And I think to do that, again, as an industry, we have to do better at recruiting in when folks are young. We have to treat them better when they come in, even if it's just for that summer job, and expose them to the opportunities that exist in our industry, because I love it and I want it to be better. And I think there are more and more people like me out there who are standing up and saying the next wave and new generation of restaurants is coming, and we got to do better. We got to do better in the way they're engineered and the way that they're built and what they're here for and how they serve people has to change. And one of the reasons for that, to be honest, is just the way that restaurants have been run for generations is untenable as a financial model, right? So I'm not even going to get in the weeds on that, but not paying your people enough and doing these things that we talked about because you, quote, can't afford it, is an engineering problem on the profit line of your business that has nothing to do with people, because you would not have a business if the people were not there. So if you cannot reorganize your bottom line to create room in your budget for people first, then we won't work with you. That's just not how we roll. Yeah.
We need to
We'll
do a quick wrap up
wrap it up.
and then we can keep the conversation going.
Yeah. This is how to reach me if you need to jump off the call, but I'm happy to take more questions. I'm on LinkedIn like crazy. Please hit me up on LinkedIn, but you can find us and me at fullcourse.com and on all forms of social media as at fullcourseofficial. Did you need to wrap this up?
Do you want to do a quick?
Yeah, you want to pull up just the schedule, the one slide with the
Sure,
next.
and just,
schedule.
also, if anybody needs an introduction to Lauren, feel free to, I'll be happy to introduce you.
Can we just thank her?
Oh.
Yeah, that's the first thing I want to say. I think it was a very timely talk. All of us involved in business, one way or another, are living this problem. I know I am too. So having some of those ideas and thinking about things you can do to get at it is important. Wanted to just go through real quick. We talked about a bunch of events to get to know each other. The happy hour is on the 16th. So pre-St. Patrick's Day, and practice up for the next day. March 23rd is the CEO book readers and the traction. Get a Grip on Your Business by Gino Wickman. So if you want to participate, get that book. You have to really, to get the best out of that, you have to read it. And then we're going to have on March 24th, Houston's going to talk about COVID-related business law best practices. You're more than welcome to participate via Zoom, or you can fly down there if you want.
Sure.
No problem. And then next month, we're going to talk about best practices for work from anywhere. So another very topical thing, because a lot of people nowadays, that's what they want to do. Okay. So wrapping this up, just wanted to tell you, people come up with a lot of interesting days. Today is the International Day of Awesomeness. And I don't know who thought that up, but I always look at this list of all these days. I'm sure we all have someone in our life that is awesome to us. The best gift we can give is recognition. So pick up the phone or meet them personally and tell them they're awesome today. Okay?
And if you or somebody you know is a CEO, a CFO, a CIO, a C-suite executive, a principal, owner, or a partner, please join our wonderful organization.
Yes, please do. And we're looking, like I said, for companies that we can advise to. So if you know companies that could use some support. Okay, well, thank you very much. We'll be around here for a while for answering some questions.
That was awesome. And we got great feedback.
Good.
In
Good.
the chat as well.
I get a little soapboxy. I hope that was okay.
We love the
We got-
soapbox.
You believe what you were saying.
We got helpful tips that can work in most industries. So many great points. Thank you. Very inspiring, useful in every industry. All on
Good.
Zoom. I love her message. Got a couple people that want to meet you. So yeah, really
Perfect.
good, really good.
Love it.
Lauren, one thing
Yeah.
I've read, I don't figure out that I recognize some people have tried to build a